Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you. What an impressive group you are. I was just saying how, absolutely impressed I am with the large number of you who are here for this meeting today. My job is to welcome you to Morgan State University, the national treasure, and, and the state of Maryland's preeminent urban research institution, research university, designated by Governor Hogan several years ago. I don't know if you have come to the campus often enough to notice the physical transformation, or some of you who have come to Morgan many years ago and seeing all of the new buildings. Even though I'm on the campus all the time, I never fail to be excited when I walk into the quadrangle and just look around at all of the beautiful buildings that we have been able to erect here on the campus during the time that I've been here. But it's more than just about the buildings. I'm really proud of what we're doing here at Morgan. The research that we are undertaking, the teaching that we do, the caring for our students, the growth in the number of doctorates that we produce every year. This morning I was at a meeting and President Wilson was remarking that when he joined the university 10 years ago, there were about 27 doctorates being produced. Now we're producing a year. Now we're producing 80. And that's yeah, we're really proud of that. But my job is to welcome you, not to brag on Morgan. So welcome. Really glad that you're here. When John McGill approached me about hosting this event here, my answer was an unequivocal yes, because I believe in what you're doing, and I value and appreciate the work that you're undertaking. I've been in education for more years than I'm going to share right now, but I don't know very much about K-12 teaching, not much experience with K-12 teaching. Most of my career has been higher ed. I've taught upper levels of high school for a little bit, but mainly higher ed. And I am just absolutely filled with awe and respect for the work that people in K-12 do. How do you take a little, I have a 4-year-old grandson, crazy, running all over the place, shouting, jumping, talking nonsense. And you take people like that and teach them to read and teach them to do math, and I'm absolutely in awe, and I want to thank you for the work that you do. And I want to welcome you not only on behalf of Morgan State University, but more specifically on behalf of the School of Education and Urban Studies, where I serve as the dean. The work that you do is the work that we do. We're all together doing the same work of educating right across the spectrum from P through 20. And so I have a very special regard for you, and the School of Education and Urban Studies is always willing to accommodate any requests from people who are out there in the field. And because of that, I was asked to welcome you. I think I did that. But I also want to share with you something that's making me very excited over the last few months. And that is the School of Education and Urban Studies is we launched in September a National Center for the Elimination of Educational Disparities. And I want to share very briefly with you a little bit about what we are doing. Because we want to involve people who are out in the school system, people like you, in the work that we do, because we fully understand that we cannot do this work alone. I don't think anybody will argue with me if I say that educational disparities is the biggest problem in education. If we think of achievement scores, if we think of college and career readiness, if we think of racial diversity in the teaching profession, any aspect of it that we think about, we see the disparities. And this center is going to address disparities. And we are very ambitious about it. We're saying it's a national center. We start our work here in Maryland, but our aim is to make this a flagship center that addresses disparities across the nation. Oh, I went the wrong way. So I'm going to move through those very quickly. Those pictures were pictures of our internal advisory. So if you look at NAEP scores, you have all, I don't have to tell you about that. NAEP math and reading scores. Who's underachieving? Black and brown children, low-income children, children living in poverty, children, and mainly in rural areas. If you think of college access and advanced course placement, if you think of resource allocation to schools, lack of diversity in the teacher force, and disproportional use of exclusionary discipline practices. And we have statistical data to support all of those as areas of disparity in education. And then enter COVID. And we have a whole new set of issues that exacerbate the disparities. I'm going to just run through these very quickly. And then, the need to address disparities has become even more urgent in the light of what we see happening in some states across the country. I've heard a report of a governor saying that Black history has no educational value. Anybody heard that? Now, that's a frontal attack on equity. That's what that is. And so, more than ever before, our role in addressing this inequity has become really absolutely crucial. And so we've designed this center, and this is a little bit of a conversation about the notion of equity. And I'll just say briefly that inequity is not only about achievement scores. And when we think of it only as achievement scores, when we try to address it, what we want to do is close the achievement gap. Yes, we want all children to read and do math, but that's not all there is to inequity. Do all children feel a sense of belonging in your classrooms? That's a critical aspect of equity. Do schools all have equal resources? I don't want to take too much time. But I just want to share with you what the center is going to be about. We say we're going to reframe the conversation, so we're not just talking about achievement scores. And we say we are going to reframe the conversation along these lines, but we're also going to transform the culture. Those are the two major goals of the center. Reframe the conversation, because if we don't have a clear picture of what equity is, inequity, we can't fix it. So we want to reframe the conversation. That'll be the research arm of the work of the center. And then we want to transform the culture by designing interventions. And that's where our collaboration with groups like yours becomes crucial. We want to together, collaboratively, not the university telling the schools what to do, but together, collaboratively, we think about and design interventions to address the problem of inequity. That's the focus. And so, and this will be the last slide that I'll show. These are the areas of work, the buckets of work, if you like, that we want to engage in. We want to break down the silos between families and students and communities and schools so that those groups work together collaboratively to support children's learning. Then we want to work specifically with teachers in urban areas. Curriculum and pedagogy. How do we design learning experiences that promote the learning of all children? Cultural proficiency. How do we create classrooms where all children feel a sense of belonging? And literacy. We have particular competence in the area of literacy. It breaks my heart when I hear statistics about the numbers of 8th graders who are not reading at grade level. If you don't learn to read, you'll never read to learn. And that's why the literacy work is so important. And we think here in the School of Education and Urban Studies, we have specific expertise in the area of literacy based on the science of reading. And then social and emotional learning. How do we help our students to achieve a sense of well-being? I'm going to stop at this point and just say that I'm looking forward to partnering with you in this work, because it takes all of our best thinking to address this persistent problem of inequity. I know you've been working all morning, and so you've, I hope, feel a sense of welcome to Morgan, but I want to reiterate that you are welcome here, not just for this session, but for the work that we will engage in going forward. I've already signaled to Mr. McGill that I'm going to be calling on him big time as we proceed with this work, and we want to involve all of you. I wish you a very productive and enlightening rest of the day. Thank you for being here. You are our partners.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prime. And thank you and your colleagues for hosting us all again here at Morgan State. You have a wonderful facility, and we deeply appreciate the opportunity to partner with you. I'd like to thank Brianna Kaufman for putting together this logistic, I'm not going to call it, it's difficult, it's complex. And I'd like to thank John McGill for securing the venue and helping put this on. Also, Angela, Blaine, Kendra, and Toby, thank you for all your help today. Very much appreciated. Next, I would like to acknowledge the coaches and teachers who took on the labor of love of offering training sessions today. You are the ones who make this day so valuable. If you offered any session today, would you please stand up so we may thank you properly? Everybody up. Ashley, I see you. Yeah, all right. I've heard nothing but wonderful things from all of the sessions, so thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It is such a pleasure to be here today at last. It's been 3 years since when we've been able to pull this remarkable group of educators together. And in that time, there is a group of people who decided to join the world of education during the most challenging time in memory. Thank goodness you made that choice. If you are in this room and you are in your first, second, or third year of working in our schools, would you please stand up so we can recognize you? Come on, all you newbies. Woo! Woo! All right. Thank you so much for joining us in this world. Now, it is my immense pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's forum. If you've lived in Baltimore for any length of time, you already know her. Jane Miller spent 46 years, most of them as an investigative reporter, and over 40 of those years at WBAL. She won numerous awards for her reporting, and she has a reputation of being fair and passionate. Someone you can trust. Her reporting has had an impact on issues as important as wrongful convictions, which helped end the death penalty in Maryland, and exposing abuse of consumers by mortgage companies. Though she officially retired last year, she obviously remains extremely active in Baltimore. We couldn't be happier that she agreed to moderate today's forum. I would like you to give a warm welcome to Jane Miller. Oh. The cards. 1 second, Jane. I knew I would forget to say this. We're passing out cards index cards? You have index cards. At the end of each speaker, we'll go through the end of the rows and collect questions. If you have any questions that come up while the forum's going on, we'll collect them and we'll ask them at the end. So again, Jane Miller.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that you use the term officially retired because it's really an unofficial retirement. And I'm busy doing a lot of things, at any rate. We have a lot to work on. There's a lot of work to do, let's put it that way. And Dr. Prime, it is okay to brag about Morgan. Yes. Baltimore is increasingly fortunate to have this institution at its center in Northeast Baltimore, but that is expanding. If you pay attention to what's going on with development in the city, you know that Morgan is planning to expand south from here. But really, such an anchor for the city and such a beacon of inspiration, education, and hopefully participation from all of us to address the problems that we face. We have a few. We have an absolute crisis of violence in Baltimore. It is not new. It has burdened families and people and communities for decades, without or with few successful strategies and sufficient investment to address it. Our young people are deeply impacted. As of this morning, of 17 people killed by homicide in Baltimore this year, 5 were under 18 years old and younger. 5 of them. As of today, 28 people injured in acts of gun violence, 8 are under the age of 18. We have had shootings on school property. We know what happens in the community doesn't necessarily stop at the school doors. And while incidents of gun violence make all the news and get all the attention, we also know there are countless other incidents of conflict, fights, and disputes, people not getting along, bullying. All of them can lay the groundwork for violence down the road. That gets us to today and this conversation that we're going to have today, and why all of you are here, because we are all involved in this, in one way or another. And you folks, in many ways, are on the front line. So, let me introduce our panel. We are all here to share ideas and knowledge about community violence intervention and its role in the schools, and I will add there's an awful lot of urgency to this matter. Our panel, Dr. Louise Edwards, Professor of School of Community Health and Policy at Morgan State, ERRICKA Bridgeford, co-founder Baltimore Peace Movement, formerly known as Baltimore Ceasefire 365, and executive director of the Baltimore Community Mediation Center. Anthony Patterson, Director of Equity and Anti-Racism at City Springs Elementary Middle School, Ryan Benefield, 8th grade student at City Springs, and SHANTAY Jackson, who is the Director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, which is the agency that is most closely involved in what I would describe as the city's most robust effort to date at community violence intervention. Let's begin with Dr. Edwards.
How's everybody today? Good. Well, listen, because I am talking with educators right now, you guys are going to make my job right here much, much easier, because I know that you will be able to follow me as I share an attempt to talk with you for a few minutes about the invisible hands of structural violence is a fundamental cause of community violence. So as we move forward, I have to remember I'm doing too many things here for a person my age. I am advancing the slides, looking at notes, and trying to keep from falling over this apparatus right here. So I'm just asking you to be with me, okay? You know I'm an educator, but I didn't put this one down. So let's get this party started, okay? That was my title page. Okay. So listen, how many of you heard of Steve Jobs? So he was the Apple man, brilliant man, great mind. Well, Steve Jobs created a theory, and the theory is called connect the dots theory. And pretty much what it says is one of the things that we do often in the School of Community Health and Policy, where I am a senior equity researcher and full professor, is looking backwards to find the answers. And that's what connecting the dots is all about. It says, Steve said, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So this is one of the models that we use as we work with communities, because one of the things that I want to share with you all, and I'm sure you probably can tell me more about this, is that we have to look for answers in unexpected places. And connecting the dots allows us to do that many times. So let's move on. While we're connecting the dots during this particular presentation, I want you to keep in mind these things here. We're going to look at policies, knowledge, hypersegregation and redlining, wisdom, historical trauma, history, and poverty. Okay? So as we move forward, there's something I want to make clear here, is that I'm going to use these three terms: structural violence, state-sanctioned violence, and structural racism. And these terms are used interchangeably. The meanings are very close and much alike. So I will give you the structural violence definition because I used it in the title of my slide and presentation. And that is, it refers to a form of violence where the hands are invisible. You can't see it. You know, there are different types of violence. There's slow violence, and those are things that happen over time and across circumstances that leads to morbidity and mortality. And then we have structural violence, which is a form of violence wherein social structures or social institutions harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. So I want to make sure we have that definition as we move forward. So this is what I'm hoping to cover, and I want you to stay with me and just keep in mind we're moving backwards and we're connecting the dots, okay? I got to advance the slides. See, I told you this is a lot for me. Okay, I did that part. All right. So these are the fundamental causes that we've identified, the fundamental root causes of violence. Flawed policies, systemic policies that have historically oppressed people of color, and the lack of progressive policies that provide access to the needed resources within communities of color. For example, food apartheid. All right? Poverty, redlining, mapping practices, segregation, both segregation and hypersegregation, which is racial segregation in the United States, is rooted in a long history of structural violence. Historical trauma, de-industrialization. Between 1950 and 2000, Baltimore lost over 100,000 jobs. What happens to people when they can't work? I don't know about you guys, but for me, eating is habit forming. Okay? Lack of opportunity and perceptions of homelessness, normalizing the culture of violence. A pair of ACEs, which comes from Wendy Ellis at George Washington University, that looks at adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments, and in some cases, underperforming schools. And I would like to share this quote that I use a lot about poverty, because some people say poverty is the deadliest form of violence, but this adds another piece to it. Poverty is not only the deadliest form of violence, but it's the most virulent root cause, okay? Keep up with the dots. All right, so I'm going to tell a story, and I'm going to make it quick, but if you need to call me or email me, you feel so to do. Baltimore is a unique place. How many people are from Baltimore? I don't mean that you moved here 10 years ago, but you were born and raised in Baltimore. Okay, now, how many people know that Baltimore was the first city in the nation to have a residential racial ordinance in terms of housing? Segregation began right here. So let's talk about that for a minute. In 1910, a black Yale law student, George McMeekin, purchased a home in a previously all-white area. Okay, at that time, Mayor Barry Mahol, he didn't like that. They felt that he should not have lived there. So, as a result, the first residential racial ordinance in the nation was put into place. That's the beginning of segregation in Baltimore, and it was aimed at blacks to quarantine us in isolated areas. And I will give a shout out to George, even though he's in the balcony of heaven. He was the first graduate of Morgan State University. Okay, so in 1930, the Homeowners Loan Corporation instituted redlining, which was what happened when people were denied money for housing. So let me get back on track here. The Homeowners Loan Corporation instituted redlining, which denied investment in neighborhoods deemed high risk, which were based on race and ethnicity. The corporation is best known today for its maps of over 200 U.S. cities that indicated to mortgage lenders which neighborhoods were safe to lend and which neighborhoods were too risky. And that was based on a color code. All right, oops, let's get back here. So a blue neighborhood received an A grade because it was the highest rated, the most safest investment. B was the area of green, and it was identified as desirable. C, that grade was a grade of the next community, and that was yellow. So that meant that the neighborhood was declining. However, when we look at the red area was identified as hazardous, and it was a code predominantly for minority neighborhoods. So the Homeowners Incorporation practices were the first official effort to racially segregate housing nationwide. The red areas have been disinvested and under-resourced for decades. So when we look at race-based housing discrimination, it was finally outlawed by the Fair Housing Act of 1968. However, today, January the 23rd, 2023, the effects of long-term segregation and redlining remain undeniable. So, I want you to this is accumulation now. This is accumulation. This is how we got where we are now to some extent. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson, he warned the United States that cutting off the urban poor, don't cut off the urban poor, because in doing so, we shall effectively cripple each generation to come. Since then, almost 3 generations of poor people of color have been subjected to the war on crime and the war on poverty, in which policing, mass incarceration have replaced anti-poverty measures as the primary governmental response to the conditions of marginalized, hyper-segregated communities. So in 1967, President Johnson formed what we know now as the Kerner Commission report. And the whole purpose of that report was they wanted them to go out into communities and find out what were some of the reasons for uprising, for riots, etc. And I know we are educators, but I'm just going to share this with you. Martin Luther King said that uprisings were what? Anybody know? This a teachable moment? Sister ERRICKA? Okay. Martin Luther King said uprisings and riots were the voices of those unheard. Okay? So, the Kerner report got it right. However, nobody listened to them. The Kerner report said that pent-up frustrations boiled over into minority communities. Americans blamed the violence on outside agitators and young black men. However, the Kerner report debunked that notion. They said the violence and uprisings were due to white racism and not black anger. The commission determined that fear drove the violence, and violence has been perpetuating in hyper-segregated communities across this nation ever since. Reasons being, okay, if anybody denies, just raise your hand and I'll just make a note. Bad policing practices, flawed justice system, unscrupulous consumer credit practices. People wanted to buy houses. People didn't want to be in poverty. They wanted to have, housing was wealth, but that was denied to many people. Poor, inadequate housing, high unemployment, voter suppression. We talk about 1965, and that's still going on today. Failed social service programs and other culturally embedded forms of structural violence, racial discrimination, but most of all, the lack of opportunity. People wanted opportunities. Okay, so what happened? Let me catch up. The Kerner Commission said, hey, we are moving towards two societies, one white and one black, separate and unequal. So let's go, what happened 50 years later? 50 years later, Otter Kerner was still alive, and he redid the Kerner Commission report. And I know my time is running out, so I'm gonna make this quick. This is what he found. He said that substantial progress in education attainment of African Americans and wages, incomes, and wealth and health since 1968. There has been improvement. But black workers still only make 82.5 cents on every dollar earned by white workers. African Americans are 2.5 times as likely to be in poverty as whites. And the median white family has almost 10 times as much wealth as the median black family. So moving on up, like the Jeffersons did, was kind of tough. With respect to home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration, America failed to deliver any progress for African Americans over the last 5 decades. In these areas, things have become what? Worse. In 2017, the black employment rate was 7.5%, up from 6.7% in 1968. That's slow progress, but moving in the right direction. And it's still roughly twice the white unemployment rate. In 2015, black ownership rate was just 40%, and that had virtually not changed at all. And the share of African Americans in prison or in jail almost tripled from 1968 to 2016, and is currently more 6 times that of the white incarceration rate. So, let's move on. Deindustrialization in Baltimore. This is the article where this data comes from. It's titled, "There is Tragedy on Both Sides of the Layoffs, Privatization and the Urban Crisis in Baltimore." And the author is Jane Berger. No relationship, right? Okay, she was just named Jane, okay. All right. You gotta make it fun. Okay, so this is what happened. By the 20th century, Baltimore was the joint. Baltimore had it going on. The city was a world leader in manufacturing chrome, copper, and steel products. Between 1955 and 1965, 338 manufacturing firms left Baltimore. They said, what? We out of here. And by 1970, the city had lost tens of thousands of jobs. Where were people going to work? How were people going to support their families? How were they going to be able to send their kids to school or to college? Globalization and privatization was rising, moving on up. However, unemployment was doing what? Going down. The job cuts took a particular toll on the African American community. There were significant cuts in social service programs, including food stamps and nutrition programs, which led to welfare reform. Major federal cuts, government priorities, and privatization deepened an urban crisis that by the early 1980s had already made Baltimore what? One of the cities with the highest percentage of people living where? In poverty. Guess what? Baltimore's populations were left to find their own way in a city that were severely distressed and troubled by a bad economy. So what happened? I think we all know that. As a result of the lack of opportunity and unemployment, the underground economy took its place. By that I mean drugs, crime, and violence picked up the slack. Even those who would never get involved in such activities became seduced by the ways of the street. Why? To make their ends meet. Why? Because, as I said, eating is habit forming. All right, now I'm going to move into where we are. Connecting the dots. This is a form of accumulation, okay? The Black Butterfly and Violence. That book was written by my brother and good friend, Dr. Lawrence Brown. His book is called The Black Butterfly, The Harmful Politics of Race and Space in America. All right, so this is what's important here. Based on the work that Spring City Schools is attempting to get across today. Recent research reveals a positive association between segregated communities and community violence. Neighborhood disadvantage is significantly associated with firearm violence, both fatal and non-fatal, due to environmental neighborhood determinants. Redline practices of 1930 contribute to increased rates of firearm violence through the changes to neighborhood environments, namely through preclusion from home ownership, concentrated poverty, poor education attainment, low school readiness, and concentration of Black communities. That's your hypersegregation. A recent study conducted by Murphy and others, including MITRE, which is an independent research and development program, found an association between the homeowners' loan corporation redlining and poor mental health prevalence of 63 of the 66 cities that were a part of this study. And you see the black butterfly here. This map is still being used today to determine a lot of things about a lot of people. And in my research, I have taken heat maps regarding food apartheid, drug overdose, and violence and homicides. And I have laid those maps over top of the black butterfly. And guess what? It's a perfect match. And these are things that have been going on for decades. People do get tired. All right, we coming down to the end. Here we go. Oh, I gotta advance my slide. I'm gonna be good when I get finished with this. Recently, at Johns Hopkins University, a study conducted by Uzi and others revealed that the relationship between historical redlining and contemporary racialized economic segregation on neighborhoods that explained over 1/3 of non-fatal shootings, which was approximately 650. That's a very large number. So according to Best and others in 2022, when they looked at 138 cities in Ohio, guess what they found? They found that they were still segregated, just like they were designed to be. So some things never change. Older people, wise people often say the past is ever present. So I think they may have something with that. So when we look at youth and violence, exposure to community violence has been defined as witnessing or victimization through violence that takes place in the community. I have a project now, and we use a theory that Dr. Dennis is over there, I think, I can see. We created a theory from a 6-year longitudinal study called the perceived risk hierarchy theory, okay? And kids, we work with kids, emerging adults. Kids who witness violence or who are a part of violence. Guess what? I got 2 minutes. Jesus, I'm running. They all have suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome. Several studies document that between 45 and 95% of urban youth witness violence. In addition to that, youth exposed to community violence have learning problems in school and often experience anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Homicide is the leading cause of death for youth ages 15 to 24. Non-fatal firearm injuries resulting from assault have accounted for more than 5,800,000 emergency room visits annually for the past 5 years. How can that be? Something is wrong with that. And the number one most common motivation for these events is retaliation. This is the part of my work that saddens me, is that youth survival expectations are linked to a range of deleterious behaviors. Poor health, socioeconomic disadvantage. When we examine the inequalities, survival expectations are low. A lot of African Americans and Mexican-born youth, foreign-born youth, do not feel that they're going to live to be more than 25 or 35 years old. So when you have those kind of perceptions, your life is based on immediate gratification. And that could also lead to violence. Baltimore's a hyper-segregated city, among others. Some other hyper-segregated cities are New York, Chicago, Cleveland, Ohio, Milwaukee, Detroit, and St. Louis and Philadelphia. I'm gonna tell you this and then I'm gonna sit down. In hyper-segregated cities, you will mostly find structural violence, toxic waste, education inequality, redlining. Oh, you need to see this too. My bad. Lack of access to quality health care, environmental racism, concentrated poverty, high rates of crime and violence, escalated unemployment, alcohol and substance use, inadequate housing, hyper-policing, which is a big issue. But what I take away from this work is that there are people who have faith, and there are people who feel hopeless. And we need to make sure that we can meet the needs of all people, wherever they are. I usually like to end with a call of violence. Call of violence, too much violence. A call to action. But I just want to say that as educators, we all have the responsibility to reach out to all of our kids. You know, Martin Luther King said, education is supposed to help young people discover their talents and interests, and indeed their sense of purpose in this world. The purpose in this world should be to live and not to harm others and to feel like they have a life. So one of the things that we've used is mindfulness. So if you want to talk about how mindfulness can help kids manage stress and anxiety, we can't change the communities that they live in, but we can certainly help them cope with it better. And that's just a thought. So I thank you.
ERRICKA Bridgeford, and do you can sit, right, if you want to sit?
I would
Or-
like to sit.
Okay.
And I'm really cute in the shoes that I have on. So maybe I'll just step out and sit right there.
Okay, that's fine.
The whole situation. Y'all see it? It's the Jones with the... All right.
And you can share, there you go, just make sure it's on. Do I need to turn one off here for that one to, well, let's find out.
Testing. This one not on.
Nope, turn on and.
I need to do something on it. Testing. Ooh.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. Hi. So first of all, I want to say two things just from my joy space. So I used to be a preschool teacher, and then I was a kindergarten teacher. And so just thank y'all, because I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. I'll come and teach grown-ups. The good news is adult learners are very much like 2 to 5 year old learners. And so my transition wasn't that difficult. And you all are dealing with things that, just thank you. You know what you're dealing with. The second thing I want to say is I mostly do all of the work I do just for the T-shirts and hoodies. And so I see the Baltimore versus y'all, I can't say the rest back there, hoodie back there. So I just want to thank you, sis, for that bit of joy that I could spot in the audience right there. Thank you very much. Okay, so I really love that Dr. Edwards started about connecting the dots, because we have a lot of conversations when it comes to Baltimore around violence as if, like, what's wrong with Baltimore? Like, there's something wrong with Baltimore. When the conversation really should be about what happened to Baltimore. If you want to understand what you're looking at right now, life makes perfect sense in reverse. So if you start now and you look backwards, you'll see how things really unfolded. In Baltimore, absolutely, some of this Dr. Edwards alluded to, Baltimore absolutely, after chattel slavery ended, and understanding that the world had never seen anything as horrific as chattel slavery before. And so Baltimore, when chattel slavery ended, was one of the places where black people were like, oh, so I'm going to own a house, and I'm going to be a lawyer, and I'm going to be a judge, and I'm going to own my own businesses. And that's what Baltimore did. And when you live in a system that looks at you and says you're not human, and how dare you understand your worth, how dare you understand your greatness, it's not just that Baltimore has been historically oppressed. We have to understand that historically oppressed really means historically targeted. Historically targeted, to intentionally remove every opportunity to understand your worth and to understand your greatness and to nurture your inner peace, your inner joy, which we all need in order to be peaceful with one another. Right? And so when you start the conversation that way, you look at Baltimore a little bit differently. Also, I'm really glad to know that you are the person who've been putting the maps all over the top of each other, because I talk about that all the time, right? Mm-hmm. That when you look at where all the liquor stores are in Baltimore, when you look at where all of the blight is in Baltimore, mm-hmm. when you look at where the poverty is, when you look at where the violence is, it's all the same map. Like, it's not like there's a lot of these things outside of those perimeters. All of those very same things are in the exact same spot. And so even if you didn't know that somebody was being targeted, things like that, like, you can't look at that and not say, oh, wow, they being targeted. I think they might be being targeted on purpose, right? So since life does make sense in reverse, we also, in my work, the way that I approach the work is about what is the world that I want to see. I start there. Because a lot of times what we do is, even in the anti-violence and conflict resolution world and the peace movement world, a lot of times when you listen to the conversations, people are not trying to work themselves out of a job. People are not really planning for peace. They're planning for more violence. They're building more jails. You know what I mean? Like, there's not real conversation about, but if the world was as peaceful as we want it to be, if Baltimore was as peaceful as we want it to be, what kind of things would we be doing? How would we be pouring into our children? How would we be pouring into ourselves? How would we be addressing our conflicts differently? Right? How would we be acting among one another if we had the kind of peace in the city that we wanted to see? Mm-hmm. What would we be doing? And you have to ask yourself that question, because so when there's a lot of, I'm trying not to use the word murder anymore. So when there's violence that leads to people transitioning into the fullness of their non-physical being, mm-hmm. Catch it? Did you catch it?
Connecting the dots.
When that happens, right, we have all of these conversations about what are we going to do about it? And there are all these knee-jerk reaction conversations, right, to try to hurry up and fix something that's been unhealed and intentionally broken. So first we need to stop saying that something is broken, because nothing is broken. Everything is working exactly as it has been planned to be working, given that people are being targeted. So that's design. That's not something that's broken. That is a lot of people are unhealed. Even people making the laws and the policies to target other people. That's called mental illness from where I sit. That's the way that you're targeting other human beings so that you can paint a picture that they are monsters and, demean their humanity and try to set it so that they don't even notice their humanity. They don't even notice their worth, right? But when we have a lot of violence and people transition and all of these conversations erupt about what to do, I really like to keep in mind that we have to start with loving the Baltimore we already have. There's so many conversations about, well, let's fix Baltimore and let's make Baltimore better. But you can't get to a better Baltimore that you think you love without loving the Baltimore you already have. You just can't do it. You can't be saying throw the city in the trash while also trying to fix the city. You can't be saying kids these days while also saying you love our youth. You just can't. Both of those things are not in alignment with one another. Your vibration is off. And so then we're creating half and misaligned solutions that don't really sustain us in the long term. Because we were just trying to throw a Band-Aid over something without acknowledging that it was designed to be the way that it is right now.
Absolutely.
So, in thinking about the Baltimore we would want, the life that we would really want, what would peace really look like? If peace was all around you, what would you be doing? How would you be acting? How would the people around you, your coworkers, the students, the parents that you work with, the community programs around you, what would we all be doing, right? So for me, there are 3 things that I focus on. Understanding. So I know that... So I'm really honored to be on this panel. I just want to say that out loud. I love Morgan, as a thing, because why not? And having been a teacher of our young people and still a teacher of grown-up people, I understand how much it takes of us to pour into other people. And so something I just want to say out loud while I have your attention is pour from your overflow. Right? We pour so much into other people, and then we go, oh, let me go rest and rejuvenate, because you poured out half of what you already had inside you. When you're really designed to stay full of your joy first, full of your peace first. And then whatever you're pouring into other people's cups are coming from your overflow, because as you're pouring, you're staying full. Imagine if in your workday you were full throughout the day. And not burned out. Imagine if students, if parents were full of their joy and peace in their lives, and then going to work, and then trying to raise their children, and then trying to come to school and pass tests and do homework. If we were full, so what kind of things nurture our fullness, our own inner peace? So there are 3 things that I focus on as I'm trying to pour from my overflow. One is for all of us to really nurture more of knowing and understanding conflict management skills. So a lot of what you've heard everybody talk about already, and all of the statistics and the data, and what you're going to hear more of, is people don't know how to resolve conflict. I mean, we do, but we do it in the most petty ways. Even you on your social media posts. You're being petty, you're sharing the petty, and petty is not going to survive the revolution.
It's not.
I hate to be the one to tell y'all, but petty is not going to survive the revolution. When peace emerges, petty is not still going to be a thing. It's not. So all of us need conflict management skills. Conflict only means opposing thoughts and views. Right? Because you would wonder, well, why isn't conflict management a huge part of the teaching curriculum already? Right? Why is it? So at the Community Mediation Center, when we're trying to get into schools to teach conflict management skills, trying to get into schools is just as difficult as trying to get into jails to do this work. which tells you something about both of those systems and how similar they are, and the bureaucracies of them, and what's really prioritized about what people get and what they don't get, right? It's very similar. But when you understand that violence is a funding stream, then it makes sense that we don't get taught and nurtured over and over again how to de-escalate ourselves, how when I'm offended and somebody is saying something to me that I don't like, that I get taught, I understand what happened in my brain, what the fight, flight, or freeze response really was, and things I can do with deep breathing and working on understanding what's really going inside of me and building my emotional intelligence when nobody is watching. I'm really paying attention to my own emotions and my own ebb and flow, and I'm honoring my emotions, and I'm learning how to listen to others and speak for my own needs in a way where others don't feel attacked, so I don't trigger the fight, flight, or freeze response in them. Like, we don't learn all of that stuff. So when we look around and go, well, why is everybody popping off at other people? First of all, that's not true. Baltimore is full of more people walking around trying not to punch somebody in the face in real life than it is people waiting to shoot somebody. People around Baltimore all day are going, yo, stop playing with me. They playing in my face, right? They got one more time. We stay trying to give each other chances. Baltimore is not a place where murder has dominion, although that's the story that gets told. So instead of living from but it's dog eat dog and it's sleep when you die, which is also a violent thing to say to ourselves, right? Forget your rest. Let's just sleep when you die. Let's pull our phones out when there's a fight. Right? Those are the ways that we think about dealing with conflict. We get taught that if you were able to be more violent in conflict, that made you the winner. Right? If you said more nasty words, if you pulled your gun out first, and the thing is we have to stop looking at violence just as once somebody got shot or stabbed or even punched. We were being violent to one another in our thoughts and words way before a gun got pulled out. If you never shot anybody, stabbed anybody, punched anybody, you can't also say that you've been as peaceful as you could possibly be to people that you've had conflict with. But where would you have learned it? Really? Because we don't nurture conflict management skills. We don't nurture us all learning how to actually resolve conflicts in a way that's honest and authentic, and also can lead to building understanding and restoring relationships instead of mothers and fathers and grandfathers having to bury. Right? And we all need conflict management skills, not just the people you're thinking about. I'm talking about you too. I'm talking about you too. I'm talking about me too. I know that the reason that I'm a person who, 2-minute warning, what is happening around here? So when you have conflict management skills, you're able to speak for yourself and build understanding and de-escalate situations in the moment. You're able to nurture your inner peace. You're able to nurture relational peace between you and others. It builds the confidence that you can navigate your own life even when things are tough. When we did conflict management training for drug court participants, and they did research to see what programs they had to go through that were most closely tied with them being able to stay sober, it was conflict management training. You know why? Because guess what people do when they are stressed out? They use. What causes stress in your life? Conflicts that you're having with people, right? Conflict management training would help to resolve those conflicts that go from school to neighborhood to school. Conflict management training will help educators not escalate things when y'all think y'all helping to de-escalate students and you're saying things in certain tones of voices or words that's triggering kids and you don't even realize it, and you're just escalating things in moments when you were even trying to help because you haven't really been taught those skills. People need safe places to process and resolve conflict. So restorative justice practices. mediation, large group discussions, like really understanding where's there a confidential, neutral, safe space that I can yell, scream, cuss, say what was really going on for me, and the conflict can be resolved through a process that was emotionally safe for everybody. And mediation in Baltimore, we know, the way that it's used at community mediation centers not only restores relationships, but even reduces recidivism, right, when people are coming home from prison. And then thirdly, people need community involvement. As human beings, a sense of belonging is a biological necessity. And so if all you do is go to school and go to work, and that's mostly it, and there's nothing you're involved in that helps to nurture us all feeling loved, us all feeling good, feeling so good that even if you do play in my face, I feel so good up here that it occurs to me how many different options I have to resolve this conflict right now while you're playing in my face. Because I feel that good, I'm able to see all my options. So we need those three things: conflict management training, safe places to really resolve our conflicts, and community involvement that pours into all of us and reminds us that no matter how separate we look, we're really only one thing. I'm done.
Where's City Springs at? I need some encouragement, because normally I do this in the library and it's a lot smaller than the space here, but also when I did the PowerPoint and I had the transition over, it was not in lowercase letters. This is kind of bothering me because I know the teachers in here, so I just had to make that. But anyways, so as first it's important to me to talk like a little bit about my role, just in the sense of like we're in this together. And so anytime that even I share anything and my City Springs people notice this, it doesn't come from a place of like, okay, I'm trying to teach you something. It comes a place where we're working together. But kind of like, as I teach, really, the thing that I was blessed with is I have this ability to ask questions. And I ask questions in the sense of a different angle or a different perspective. So that's kind of the goal that I have, is just, again, asking questions to get y'all to think possibly from a different perspective. The main message I want you to get today, and it's something that my pops always taught me. Speaking of my pops, any 49ers fans in here real quick, because I'm a 49ers fan and we did come through. Sorry about that. Sorry, I know there's some Philly fans out here too, but we got you. But he always said, control what you can't control. And I know as teachers in here, and as a teacher myself, and when you hear these things, it's like, damn, what can I do? Because I'm the one that's seeing these kids on a daily basis. So it's like we have all these structural and systematic and institutional racism that goes on, but yeah, I got kids that come to my classroom. So my message to you is control what you can't control. Can you turn it for me? And see, great minds think alike, because the quote you were referring to, I had that in here from Dr. King. See? But I want to just make a little change from it, because, as was said, when the violence happens, it's saying something. Yeah. And if you think about it from our perspective in terms of education, then what are if America wasn't hearing and listening to the violence that was happening in neighborhoods, then what's our school not hearing? When we have kids that are coming in and having violence and having conflict, have those things, then what are we not hearing? Again, this is not a blame thing, but at the same time, if we're not understanding things, then we are being part of the problem, right? Can you, So first, just a quick story. Again, if you control, you can control. There's a couple of City Springs scholars that, I ran into a couple weeks ago, and it kind of broke my heart. There's this one scholar who was at City Springs, taught by a lot of people that are in here. He was loved by so many of us. He was a really good student. He held it down the B range, multi-sport athlete. He was just a great kid overall. And then when he left us, he hasn't been to school since. I know the pandemic changed a lot. If you think about 8th graders that had it during the pandemic, and then they had to go to high school for the first time, and they didn't get the experience as a freshman, they were online, that impacted and cut off so many scholars from actually then their sophomore year going. Because virtual learning, as we all know, those of you that taught it, whew. And it was so tough on us. Imagine what it was like sitting on a screen and potentially being around stuff that you even want to be a part of at home. Like, kids were so turned off from the school process that now looking at him, now he's getting caught up in things that maybe would not be the case had he still been in school. So that just always sticks in my mind, and I wanted to share. Can you move on for me? So again, control what you can control. So here's 3 questions that I wanted to pose to people sitting in this room, because see, that's also part of the problem too, was like that saying of really preaching to the choir. It really does like preaching to the choir, because like where's like the state policy makers and the lawmakers, like that's a whole separate conversation that we'd have with them. But see, they're not in this room with us. They're not putting in the work on a daily basis in terms of the things that we deal in the trenches. So these are questions that I want to ask y'all in terms of, so what is your school working to combat systematic or institutional racism? What's your school doing in terms of in Baltimore? Because if you can think about the high school process, I'm not from Baltimore, so when I came here and was like, yeah, we got to try to send our kids to these certain high schools because they go here, they're probably not going to graduate. I'm like, what? So depending on what high school you go to is basically determine the trajectory of a lot of these kids. I was like, how is that even possible? So what is your school doing about that? That's one question I had. Number 2 was, are you working in your school to combat it? Because you know, as schools, we do things sometimes that aren't in the best interest. Sometimes it's ignorance. Sometimes it's just things that have been done in the past. But in your school, are you doing things to really challenge it? And I'm very grateful of the role that I have now, because our principal felt like it was super important to have a position. Am I the only BCP school currently that has like this director of equity and anti-racism like actual position? Okay, BCP. No, but again though, just in terms of as a school, right, these are questions we gotta ask ourselves all the time, not just once a month or when February particularly hits or once a year. Like this is daily, right? And then number 3, is your classroom a space that shows love and provides alternative options for scholars when it comes to conflict resolution? This is something that these lovely ladies already talked about, right? Because you can control some of these things. You can control your space. All right, can you move on for me? So here's another control you can control. Why are you currently in the role that you're in? And this is just, again, a reflection in your own brain, but like, are you here because this was your first job and this is where you ended up? Or are you here because this is your purpose? That's a big difference when you have a kid come in your classroom where you're here because this was the only job I could get versus I'm here because I want to be here. That's a deep question if you think about that. Another question, how well do you understand the history? And I appreciate y'all for being able to break that down for us, but if you're teaching in Baltimore, you better know that stuff because that's impacting the kids that you deal with daily, right? And then the other question up there is, what are you doing to contribute to making your school a better place? And that can look a lot of different ways. And again, no one's sitting here judging what you're doing, but these are, again, questions that I like to ask to get people to think about. So what are you doing in your school that's making it better? You move on for me. Again, control what you can control. When people used to ask me, like, what grade or subject do you teach? I'd be like, yeah, 7th, 8th grade history. I kind of changed that to what grade or subject do you teach? I said I teach 13 and 14-year-olds. Because you got to keep in mind that you're not teaching a subject. You're teaching human beings, right? And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes and mind you, some of this is not, again, control what you can control, but I know the pressure that comes down from teaching. I know systematically and what you have to prepare kids for and what's on those state tests, but you're teaching human beings. So if you have people that set up a system that was designed, intentionally designed for us to fail, then I'm not listening to those people. And I hope my principal don't fire me for that. I know she won't. But at the same time, right? At the same time, you know, we're teaching human beings, and so how much time are you actually spending? I have the people who work there know when I say it, but a 6th grade math teacher that we have, you go in his classroom, sometimes you wouldn't notice he was a 6th grade math teacher because the math is not going on sometimes. It's like, okay, 6th grade math teacher, what are you doing? But to be real about that, had a question with him. He's like, yeah, I put math like 4th on my list. And I was like, I would love to be in that class. Because I'm getting life. And that teacher is putting those things first before it gets to math. Now keep in mind, I do great math stuff. You're not gonna be in trouble after me saying this, but at the same time though, it's all those things connected to math. So how much time is spent your topic versus life science, and are those two things one and the same? Because you can teach your subject or your content simultaneously. It's hard, it's challenging, it's a lot of work, but it can be done. And then the last thing, how much time is given by your school leaders to address real life situations? So if there's a fight that happened at school and you have to teach a reading lesson, what decisions do you make? And do you feel like you can make the decision that you need to make? And do you feel strong enough and empowered enough to make the decision knowing that you're teaching human beings? That's a lot in there. Control what you can control. And I know that we talked about this too in terms of how does your school use restorative practices and other methods to teach conflict resolution. We have a director of restorative practice that we just recently hired. We have Mr. Barry, who's been at our school for the longest. We have a whole concentric team hired for conflict resolution. It's a huge part of City Springs, but there's still a lot of work that we can do for it. But it's super important. It's super important work. How do you personally address conflict in your own classroom? Again, is that something that you just brush off, where you have 2 4th graders in an argument? This is like the 7th time they argued this week. Trust me, I know it's draining. But again, how are you addressing that? Are you making sure that your space, control what you can control, is a space where people feel valued and loved and heard? But there's a lot going on. And then the last thing, are there healthy ways of disagreeing? Does that exist in your classroom space? Are you intentionally and strategically designing ways for conflict, healthy conflict, because we don't all think the same, and that's what makes us great. That's what makes us individual. So are there healthy ways of disagreeing in your classroom? I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you. I'm almost done. So control what you can control. So what are your connections like? When I say this name, some people will know who this is, but there's this goofy guy from California who teaches at our school, but the kids love him. But they love him for a reason. Very strategic and very intentional about finding ways to connect, engage scholars in class, and it's powerful. In what ways do you enhance your lessons? You know, I'm blessed that my daughter goes to City Springs, and she was in the class, and the story that they had in their DI book was about a white girl with a ponytail. There's no white girls in that class. So the teacher found a book that talked about, black hair and black love, and she incorporated that book alongside with it and made that connection. That was powerful because my daughter came home and talked about it. Look, Daddy, my daughter took most of my hair, mind you, but but she was bragging about what she was able to make connections with, and it was super powerful what she took away from it. And then lastly, in what ways do you talk about or address real life issues in your class? Have you ever talked about racism and violence in your class? Even if you teach math? Because those things are real, and there's connections made all about. And if you aren't talking about those things, are you really a highly effective teacher in Baltimore City? And then even the extracurricular activities. What programs and activities exist at your school to keep scholars interested and motivated? Because when we talk about violence, a lot of things that you already outlined, but in terms of options and engagement, we can help with that as schools, keeping our scholars engaged, giving them options, making them feel like they have opportunities. We can make a difference with those things. How do you assist with extracurricular activities at your school? I mean, trust me, people have children, people have, like you were talking about in terms of pouring out, and when you feel drained, it is very hard. But if you love what you do and you're able to make that difference, you know, being able to do those things after school and extra things is so powerful. So kind of just leaving, again, as an educator, you have to understand that just because certain factors are beyond your control doesn't mean that you can't make a positive impact on a daily basis. Like, you really can change lives. And just because you might not impact one person the way you wanted to, but you can impact somebody else. And even as I used to teach in the room, sometimes when I would tell them, like, look, I'm not gonna reach everybody today, but I'm gonna reach somebody. And that should be your goal always, is to reach somebody. Provide a space where you're giving them options, alternatives. We talked about that. Can you allow children to be children? But at the same time, you're pushing them and make them better versions of themselves. You're leveling them up. Good, a lot of questions. But it wouldn't make sense for us to talk about violence and how it impacts scholars without hearing from a scholar. So we have a brave, clap it up already for him. Brave scholar from City Springs that we asked, do you mind sharing just, you know, how does violence impact you? And what more can we do to help you? And so Orion wrote something. Orion, you don't have to stand. You want to share from sitting down? Because this is just the teacher in me. That's why I had to stand up.
The presence of violence in my school impacts me as a scholar. It kind of makes me feel like stressed and like out of place, because school is obviously supposed to be a place where you're supposed to learn and obviously feel safe. But, you know, when you see all the other things around you, like fights, outraged parents and stuff like that, it kind of makes you think, like, am I supposed to act like that? Or, like, is this the normal? And I feel like if you try to fix the violence, your voice isn't heard, because you have students and staff, teachers and staff trying to help the students that are creating the violence and stuff like that. So you kind of have to wait for your voice to get heard. But you always can't, you know, blame the students, because they have stuff going on at home. Like, they probably don't even have a home. And I feel like some supports that are needed from schools is to really connect with students, you know, even as them having a circle in the class, talking about their feelings, or, you know, them talking to a teacher about their feelings, because, you know, you're not just, you know, you're just teaching a student, but if you're just teaching them about, like, a subject or something, are you really even teaching a student? Because, you know, their feelings also come first. So, like, you know, you just really need to support and connect with them.
Dr. Rickett, I know it makes you happy because he rhymed with someone that came all the way through City Springs. But just a testimony of who he is as a person. I know his father is here, and the son that you raised is amazing. But again, it speaks volumes to where we know we have a huge task at hand. But, you know, it's us that every single day, you really, really, really can make that positive difference. And it really can change somebody's lives. So, again, as usual, we always appreciate everything that you do and that we do, because I know I'm a part of it too. So thank you.
Do you want to stay seated? Come up here. And do you have a PowerPoint? Okay, gotcha. SHANTAY Jackson, Director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. Monzi.
Good afternoon, folks. How's everybody doing? I'm going to let you all know that you got all the comic relief that you were going to get before me. I am not funny at all. That's all you're getting. So I want to start just by asking a couple of questions, if I could, before I dig deep into violence prevention, the role of schools, the role of the Scott administration, what our office is doing in partnership with you all and with residents. Want to get those two questions asked and answered of you all, but also want to share some data. I want to share some information. How many of you are familiar with the social determinants of health?
Gotta know them.
So for those in the audience, somebody share one or two social determinants of health with me.
Education, housing.
You are not in the audience, Doc. She just gave you two, right? Education, health, access to resources, those sorts of things, right? How many folks are familiar with adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs? And of those of you in the audience, apparently I am a comedian today. How many of you know your ACEs score? And keep your hand up if your ACEs score is 4 or higher. Last year, in partnership with the Baltimore City Health Department, my agency was responsible for the delivery of a child fatality review report. We looked at child fatality over the previous 5 years, and we learned that 208 children and young people under the age of 18 had died in Baltimore City. That 91% of those deaths were preventable. That's about 185, 190 deaths that were preventable. Homicide is the leading cause of child fatality, with 45 of our young people aged 7 to 17 killed by someone who's not related to them. 24 children from birth to age 7 killed by a parent or a caregiver. Those child fatality victims are predominantly vulnerable infants and children and teenagers aged 16 and 17 who are struggling in school, and involved in the juvenile justice system. 90% of the children who died were children of color. So that speaks directly to what you've heard a couple of my co-panelists mention with regard to the structural racism that exists in not just our city, but in this country, and its contribution to violence, its contribution to the social and environmental factors that really underpin child fatality. A lot of those young folks, parents and caregivers, were struggling with substance abuse, or they were, with mental health disorders, or they were, domestic violence, their own trauma, poverty, or just living in a violent neighborhood. 2/3 of those children were found to have 4 or more ACEs. So out of that report came a commitment, a renewed commitment, not only by the health commissioner, who I consider a very dear friend and a partner, but also by the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, Baltimore City Public Schools, the Department of Juvenile Services, and all of the folks that sit on the Child Fatality Review, because we have meetings every single month where we're reviewing cases of our children who are lost to us, to determine what interventions could be put in place to reduce those losses. We decided in that moment that we were going to be even more intentional about what violence prevention looks like for our children in its entirety, and also being really thoughtful about the role that schools play in making sure that violence is not only prevented, but that there is intervention, that there is appropriate levels of enforcement, and to the extent that we need to rehabilitate young folks, that we do that so that we can get them re-enrolled or reintegrated into school. Going to share a couple of more statistics with you all. In looking at Baltimore City's 3 most violent high schools last year, there were 19 arrests across those 3 high schools, 8 at one school, 6 at another school, 5 at another school. When we looked at suspensions, we looked at fighting, we looked at attacks on students, and we looked at physical contact with school personnel. In one school, 123 folks were suspended for fighting, 5 of them for attack on a student, 53 of them for physical contact with school personnel. In another school, 92 for fighting, 3 for attack on a student, 17 for physical contact with school personnel. And in the last school, 68 for fighting, 1 for an attack on a student, and 10 for physical contact with school personnel. You've heard panelists mention how critically important conflict management is, how critically important conflict transformation is. I would offer that the Scott administration believes the same to be true. And it's one of the reasons why, as a part of the work that we're doing in cultivating a community violence intervention ecosystem, we are leaning heavily into the school-based system. So community violence intervention, or CVI, is really this community-centered approach that puts people who have lived experience associated with trauma and violence at the center of our work ethic, our work efforts, rather. And they are the folks that are driving this work. Before Monty existed, before Mayor Scott became mayor, Baltimore did have some community violence intervention work happening. By show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Safe Streets? Mm-hmm. Now keep your hand up if you were familiar with Safe Streets before Mackenzie Frost started following me around. That's a real question. Now, before Mayor Scott got here, the community violence intervention landscape that we had was made up of 10 Safe Street sites, was made up of loose partnerships with some hospitals and some medical systems, and with one organization that was providing life coaching and supports to young folks. Those programs were very disconnected, very disparate. And while they had missions, they didn't have a strategic mission together to do the work. By definition, an ecosystem is one that is integrated, where gears turn into each other, where they feed and fuel each other, where it's an entire system and not just the components of the system. And so when we think about the Baltimore that we see when our city is completely healed, that's what an ecosystem contributes to. So when we talk now about the ecosystem that we're building, it's about not only taking those 10 Safe Street sites, but expanding conflict mediation and violence intervention programming. It means that we've got stronger partnerships with Baltimore City's hospital partners. So I mentioned before that we had some loose partnerships. At this point, we now have partnerships with every major medical system in Baltimore City. So that's 8 hospitals across 5 medical systems. These are the folks that are treating the violence that's coming from our streets and from our schools. These are the systems that saw Deontay Dorsey just a week and a half ago. These are the systems that saw the other 4 young people who were non-fatal shooting victims at Edmonston just a few weeks ago, and the 2 non-fatal shooting victims down in South Baltimore who were 16 and 17. So these partnerships are critical around violence prevention because, as the doctor mentioned, retaliation is a whole thing. About 50% of the gun violence in our city is rooted in retaliation. Whether it's retaliation for bullying or retaliation for something that happened on social media, or retaliation because you hit my sister or my cousin, or retaliation for shooting me. 50% of our violence is driven from retaliation. And so in addition to partnering with hospital-based partners, also making sure that we're expanding life coaching. How are we making sure that we're connecting our young people to folks inside and outside of the school who they can talk to at any point in time? And so a part of the work that my agency did in funding Baltimore City public schools was to ensure that over 500 city school employees received mental health and first aid training. Some of you in the audience, I'm sure, already have, and many others will be receiving that training over the next couple of weeks. So when we talk about our school-based violence intervention programming, we know that our young people are experiencing more trauma than many of us have had in our whole lives. And that we know that it doesn't just go away when they walk out of the school building or when they walk into the school building. So it's been our priority to make sure that students have the tools that they need to resolve the conflicts that they have, because naturally you're going to have conflicts. What a boring world we would live in if we just all agreed on everything. So that we can make sure that those conflicts don't translate into physical or emotional harm. They're the life skills that we're looking to teach our young people that's going to carry them through their life journey. And we're really proud to partner with the Baltimore City Public School System. So the 3 schools that I mentioned to you before, Mervo, Carver, Digital Harbor. Those are the 3 schools that we are stepping into this year in order to provide school-based specialists that are going to work with young people, school administrators, and families to shift community norms about the acceptability of violence. These intervention workers are going to work with their supervisors to recommend services based on individual needs of students, including employment, educational support, college readiness, familial services, parenting classes. But guess what? We aren't doing it alone. Each of these schools will have school ambassadors that are students. So 2 students from each grade level at each school will be compensated to be school ambassadors, to work to bridge the gap between young people and adults in ways that result in us being able to effectively manage conflict. And at the same time, my office just released funds to 2 other community-based organizations who are providing social emotional learning in eight schools in the elementary and the middle school space, because we know that prevention is important, right? And so while we're talking about intervention and prevention in high school, we want to make sure that in addition to standard restorative practices, that we are taking advantage of opportunities to help our young people develop into their whole selves, regardless of what that means. And in so doing, making sure that these folks really are able to develop the interpersonal skills associated with effective problem solving and communication and empathy and emotional regulation and behavioral skills. One of the things that I learned, and that ERRICKA and I have shared often in doing trainings with folks, is that there's no question that Harriet Tubman was angry. Right? Was the sister angry, y'all?
Yeah.
She was angry. And so having this conversation with our children about emotions and them being able to understand that there's no such thing as a bad emotion or a negative emotion is important. Helping them understand the intensities of their emotions, that many times we default to, I'm happy, sad, mad, glad, when in fact, a lot of times when you believe you're angry, it's rooted in disappointment or frustration or feeling hurt. And so this is the work that we need to do and that we're committed to doing in ways that are rooted in emotional intelligence and honoring how you feel and translating that into the appropriate behavioral response. So, oh, you're waving the thing at me. I'm done. I was going to say, I'm done. I'm done.
We have questions?
Y'all should have, yeah.
I have a question in the meantime while we get the cards up here. And the teachers can probably answer this. Do you teach the history of the city in city schools? The history of the city? Yeah, like exactly what we're talking about. Oh, yeah. We don't teach it? Not the 1910 ordinance, not redlining, not blockbusting, not the whole 9 yards of why we have the black butterfly? Y'all need to see the documentary we've been working on. It's all there. Yes.
Can ERRICKA tell us about the services she offers to schools?
For conflict management?
Absolutely, she can.
Yes, okay.
Testing, okay.
Go.
The question was, can ERRICKA Bridgeford talk about the services that are offered to schools? Absolutely, she can do that. Okay, so the free service that is always offered to Baltimoreans, people who live and or work in Baltimore, is mediation service. And also, if it's more than 6 or 8 people, large group facilitation, so like larger circle dialogues. But mediation is basically a meeting that people schedule. It is scheduled when they are free to talk about any kind of, not just conflict they're having, but really any kind of hard conversation, to make plans about things that are happening. But it can be everything from your dog pooped on my lawn to we had a fight, I punched you in the face, to baby mama drama, to we are raising children together, landlord tenant, business. So think of anything where somebody got on your nerves, you can bring it to mediation for free. And that service is also available to students having conflict with one another, teachers having conflict with parents, staff having conflict with one another, right? All of it can come to mediation, and you can get it by contacting the Baltimore Community Mediation Center. Also, we offer conflict management training. And so this teaches everything from really thinking about how you view conflict, because how you view it then guides your behaviors in conflict and then determines the kind of outcomes you're going to get. So there's the conflict theory parts of it, so that you can take a look at self and maybe shift some of your behaviors and perspectives. And then we get deeper into the actual skills of how, if I actually am offended, how do I listen and work on understanding and speak for my own needs and all of that kind of stuff. How do I problem solve with others in ways that don't, that are more peaceful. Also, on the Baltimore Peace Movement side, formerly known as Baltimore Ceasefire 365, if you would like to become an official peace movement school or peace movement class, we now call them Peace Promise, because peace is the promise. We all have peace inside of us, and we all just need opportunities to lean into and nurture and uplift the peace that we all already have, and that's what the movement is all about, us all doing that together. And so there are schools who have become official schools, which means they incorporate the movement's culture into their school, curriculum-wise and everything. So every place from Learning How, which is a child development center, to the University of Maryland School of Social Work is a Baltimore Peace Promise school, and everything in between. And so this means we give you a training, an 8-hour training that includes conflict management and emotional intelligence, but also how to be involved and engaged in your community around, we don't really call it anti-violence work anymore, because we notice that when you focus on something, you create more of it. When you focus on what's wrong, you get more struggling with what's wrong. So instead of calling it anti-violence, we call it peace work. And so we give that training to schools and community members about how to be peace workers in your community, even if the community is feeling hopeless, how to honor that hope and give compassion and love and still get people excited about their own joy and the peace inside of them, and incorporating that in the schools, having your own events every time there are the peace movement weekends and all of that stuff. So if you're interested in that, you can go to BaltimorePeaceMovement.com to contact us on the mediation and conflict resolution side, communitymediation.org.
We're really running short on time, but I want to ask this question because it's a point of information that many of you would probably like to have an answer to. Have there been any studies on how to best combat distrust towards schools from families and communities? That's a large topic, I know. I think whoever asked this question was probably looking for some guidance. It's an interesting question. Okay, we're going to have an awards presentation. If there are other questions, because I haven't asked all of these, but if you have questions specifically, we should have a few minutes remaining to be able to ask them. Okay.
Let's see here. Put this right here. Well, I have the pleasure of getting back to what ERRICKA Bridgeford was talking about with the joy, because one of the things that I will promise you all is that when I walk through the schools, I see so much joy in our classrooms, and that as heavy and weighty this topic was today, one thing we can all do is walk through our schools and see the love and the joy that's happening every day, which is an antidote. So thank you. Yeah, thank you all. But one of the great sources of joy is giving out the Brenda Kahn Award every year. We had a dear friend and colleague. She passed away not quite 4 years ago at the tender age of 49. She was an exceptional teacher, coach, and friend, and we very much feel her loss to this day. When she passed away, John McGill had the idea of honoring her life's work by giving an annual award to a teacher or a coach who demonstrated a similar level of excellence and commitment as Brenda. This is one of those fun awards that comes with a cash prize of $1,000. Yeah. This year's award goes to someone who has been teaching with us for a very long time, starting out at West Baltimore Middle School. Now, everybody starts to narrow as I give the clues. West Baltimore Middle School, and this teacher has been at their current school for 15 years. We are excited that for the first time, the Brenda Kahn Award goes to a middle school teacher. This teacher is disproportionately mentioned by students in their 8th grade exit interview as the teacher who has had the biggest impact on them. This teacher treats their students to world-class kazoo concerts. And this teacher, kazoo, and this teacher has an imaginary student in his room named Kenny, who serves as the brunt of this teacher's frustrations. This way, he doesn't have to say anything harsh to his real live students. He can say, "Kenny, would you please stop talking?" And then the kids can giggle and stop talking, because they have not been spoken to like that. Many of you, of course, know who this is by now, but I want to say one more thing about this teacher. When a school goes through a renewal process. They get these special reports that are very difficult, apparently, for the state to run. So you only get them when you're up for renewal. And one of the measures that they give you is something called growth, where they match kids from one grade to the next grade. Like if you got a 720 in the 6th grade, they match you with other kids who got a 720, and then they see how you did in the next grade. And then they give you a percentile ranking based on how your kids grew. So it applies to kids from all over the performance spectrum. The number on the 7th grade math at Hampstead Hill growth was 100. This teacher had the most growth of anybody in the state in his math students. So Brian White, come on down! Woo! All right, Kenny, stop. Stop clapping, Kenny. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Brian. We have a plaque for your school. We have a check for you, and we have this beautiful thing for your mantle at home. Awesome. All right. All right. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for everything. Thank you for everything. Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to do about a 60-minute speech minus about 59 minutes, so just 1-minute speech on, it's the most important thing is the students. So that's why I've been teaching for 20 years. It's for the kids. They're the number one priority. I want to thank Mr. Hornbeck and all the colleagues that I work with. Without them, this is not possible. So again, thank you guys, and let's go.
Thank you, Brian. Do you want to close this out, Brian? Okay. You want to say a few things? No. Oh, afterwards. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm just going to quickly just say thank you to all of you for attending today. A special thank you to all the presenters. This was a really amazing day of bringing all 6 of our schools together as a community for celebration and for learning. Just a little rundown, we had 27 presenters, we had 27 workshops, and close to 300 participants today, so that is amazing. So that's really all I had to say. And a little plug for a fun event coming up in April is the Are You Smarter Than a BCP Student? We would love all of you to attend. We would love all of your your families and your community members to attend as well. We are giving $25 off if you are a BCP employee, teacher, staff. I will be sending out an email later with codes for that. We're also trying to use this as a fundraiser for your personal school. So every ticket sold, $10 of that ticket will go directly back to your school. So it is a school fundraiser as well as a BCP fundraiser. So the only other thing I have, one other quick announcement is MSDE. Do you want to come down? Wants to give a quick announcement as well.
Good afternoon, teachers. Thank you so much for allowing us to have just a quick minute, I promise, very quick. I'm from Maryland State Department of Education. My name is Toddy Robinson. I'm Community Engagement Coordinator. Fairly new position because we are doing our best to engage with our educators, with our students, our stakeholders, our parents, our families, and we'd love your help with that. If you haven't heard already, we have a strategic planning survey out right now, and the website is marylandpublicschools.org/survey. We also have an educator roundtable, virtual roundtable coming up on Wednesday. We'd love for you to tune in, add your voice to the YouTube chat. We do use all the data we collect in the ongoing development of our strategic plan for the blueprint. So please visit our website, strategicplan.marylandpublicschools.org, and also visit us upstairs as you exit. Those of you who are upstairs or come upstairs and see us, we have a fun little, photo opportunity, a photo you can take home, and some free stuff that we love to give away. And also, we'd love if you could share some thoughts about Black History Month with us so that we can continue to share that with our stakeholders and on our social media, because we all know how truly important it is. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here today. Have a great afternoon.
All right, that brings us pretty much right up to 3 o'clock. If you have a question that you didn't get answered, come on down. We'll stick around until, but in the meantime, a fabulous hand for our presenters and Jane Miller. Woo! You can't keep teachers past 3, yes. What's up? We're going to stay here till, yeah, absolutely. We had a few more.